Even before there was a winner in the fight between Jake Paul and Mike Tyson, that boxing match was poised to make history. I mean, for one, it's the first fight streamed by Netflix. Also, Tyson's first fight in almost 20 years. And then to top it all off, Jake Paul won? There's a lot to get into with this one. Let's go. I'm Alamin Abdul Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, look, one of the most anticipated fights in recent boxing history happened live on Netflix this past Friday. On the one hand, you have YouTuber turned pro boxer Jake Paul against one of the fiercest fighters of all time, of course, Iron Mike Tyson. Both men entered the ring on Friday. They had their critics, also they had their fans. And then 60 million households tuned into Netflix for that main event, and they crashed the platform's service. Then this happened.
After 8 full rounds, we go to the judges' scorecards for the official decision. Declaring your winner by unanimous decision, Jake El Gallo Paul!
Well, it happened. Jake Paul beat Mike Tyson.
After 8 rounds, Jake Paul beats Mike Tyson. Morgan Campbell watched that fight. He's got a lot of thoughts on the fight, also the impact on the sport. Morgan, welcome back to the show, friend.
Hey, always good to be back, LME.
I'm delated that you're here. Talk to me about your reaction. Your reaction to Jake Paul beating Mike Tyson on Friday.
Was like my reaction in contrast to how other people have reacted?
You choose how you want to interpret that.
Because my reaction, and I am, not that I expect everyone to know what I've been saying about this fight ever since March when it was first announced.
Yeah.
People that have read my writing, people that follow me on social media, people that were watching CBC News Network on Friday when I did a hit on there. I have been telling everyone who will listen to lower their expectations for the main event because we have a 58-year-old man who has sciatica and bleeding ulcers, bad knees, and a bad back against a 27-year-old man who is a competent enough pro boxer, but nowhere near like top 10.
Sure.
And that is always a recipe for an extremely underwhelming bout, which is what we had in the main event. You had an old guy that was too slow to cut the ring against a young guy who was reluctant to trade punches with the old guy. So what we had was a lot of Jake Paul and Mike Tyson just sort of standing at each other from 6 feet apart, staring at each other. Tyson swaying back and forth, throwing one punch at a time. Jake Paul throwing a few jabs and a couple uppercuts. And then when they got close enough that Tyson could touch him, they would hug, which is the fight. If someone had asked me to describe what we're going to see, that's what I would have predicted.
But the degree to which you're underwhelmed is actually overwhelming me, right? Like you're kind of like, of course, this is exactly how it played out. And
yes.
and I have to say, I have to push back on that a little bit because the promo and the hype for all of this, Morgan, it's been a 6 months long hype train that was building and building and building. And one of the things that helped that hype train build was like all the footage of Mike Tyson training that we saw.
Yep.
Everybody was like, oh, this is going to be like Mike Tyson might actually pull this thing off. So if people watch that training footage and then they watch Mike Tyson and they were like, these are two different people, what are they missing?
No, they're not. It's not two different people. It's sort of a symptom of our times in that a lot of folks were willing and willfully fell for this con and willfully talked themselves out of seeing what they saw and knowing what they know. In any other context, what 58-year-old man would you even imagine is capable of putting on a world-class pro sports performance? Like we have seniors tour in golf for people that are too old to play regular golf, and regular golf is essentially just a walk through a park with a stick and a ball. And you get to a certain age, you're like, this is too hard for you. We're going to get you with the other oldies. Yet somehow we keep talking ourselves out of the idea that Mike Tyson is 58 years old with a long list of health problems. And so his age was sort of portrayed as incidental to this promotion when the age is the only thing that that enables Jake Paul to beat up on him because he is 58 years old. So what people saw in this training footage was were one very, 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 very short clips 10 seconds, 15 seconds. This
Yeah.
fight was 16 minutes, and they shortened the rounds as a concession to Mike Tyson's age. And second of all, this is just training. He's hitting a punching bag. He's hitting a guy who's holding pads. There's nothing stopping him from getting to his target. Whereas in real life, the guy punching you is stopping you from getting to your target. So this would be like if you took a 60-year-old former NBA player with a long list of injuries and saw him shooting free throws in an empty gym,
Right.
and then decided based on that footage that he could jump right back into maybe not the NBA, but like the G League or like a Division II college game. Like
Sure.
he can't, because yeah, he can hit free throws, but he is too slow to run up and down the court. He's not going to get his own shot. He's not going to hit a step back three. He's not going to run off screens. None of this, because he is too old. He's too slow. And this is what we saw with Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. A 15-second clip is different from a whole fight.
I want to say that also, like, while that event between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul was underwhelming, that most electrifying fight of that night was, of course, the co-headlining rematch between boxing champions Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor. But you say that fight was actually kind of put there for a pretty strategic reason. What was going on with the placement of that fight?
Yeah, that was the co-main event. And so the beauty of the co-main event is that for all the people who tuned into that fight card looking for competitive bouts, there were competitive, high-level, meaningful boxing fights on that card.
Yeah.
The fight before that, Mario Barrios versus Abel Ramos, that was a high-level welterweight fight. That fight headlines other fight cards. And boxing fans knew that. Same with Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano.
Yeah.
So that's the beauty of that, is that the people, the audience, to the extent that the audience was full of boxing fans, they had what they wanted. The flip side of that, though, and the downside of it, is that Serrano and Taylor fought so hard at such a high level with their 2-minute rounds that it made Tyson and Paul look even slower and less skilled by contrast. And they look slow and unskilled as it was, but in contrast to Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano, it looked even worse.
I gotta say that, like, one really big headline out of all of this is Netflix's entry into the arena, right? Like, the idea that 60 million households tuned in to this live event. And yes, of course, the idea that, like, their servers couldn't handle it for a little while. They crashed. People had a lot of trouble sort of continuing to stream the fight as we were watching. But we also know that they're about to kick off a $5 billion deal with the WWE to start streaming Monday Night Raw. That starts in January. When you look at the way that the fight unfolded, how do you think what we saw on Friday, with the problems that they had with the streaming, but also with the number of people who were like, yes, I will tune into Netflix for a live event. What does that tell us about, like, the Netflix preparation for starting to stream things like wrestling starting in January?
Well, one, it reminded me of the early days of DAZN. If you can think back 7 years ago when DAZN,
the streaming service for sports.
The streaming services, and they came to Canada and they had bought the rights to NFL Sunday Ticket.
Yeah.
And then all those same problems in terms of slow streams, stop streams, buffering, crashing streams, they happened. And so because their problem was they spent big on rights and they did not spend on the infrastructure to deliver this product. So it sort of reminded me of that, because if you, as Netflix and as Jake Paul and his promotional company, Most Valuable Promotions, if you're saying we are anticipating record crowds, then you also have to get the back end of your technology ready for these record crowds. Now, all these numbers, I'd caution everyone to take them with more than a grain of salt, probably 2 or 3 grains of salt, only because these numbers are coming from Netflix. It's not like some independent auditor tells you how many people stream the fight. This is Netflix telling you how many people they think stream the fight. So we just have to take their word for it. And as a practical matter, how many people at their house or wherever they were watching the fight were streaming the fight on a television, but also on a backup device on a phone or a laptop, because the streams were buffering and crashing. But if we're counting concurrent views, now I myself am responsible for 3 concurrent views. It's precisely because the technology is not working.
Okay,
right?
fair enough.
So take all that with a grain of salt.
I have like 30 seconds left, but I got to ask you this question. We heard something from Mike Tyson about the idea of, like, somebody said, hey, what does this do for your legacy? And he said, who cares about legacy? And now, like, the last fight that we will have seen him fight is him fighting a YouTuber. I mean, not to be rude, because Jake Paul has... It doesn't matter. Okay, go ahead. Tell me about this. It doesn't
matter, Elamine.
Okay.
Because Mike Tyson's superpower, I keep saying this, is convincing us that everything that happened after 1988 doesn't matter. And we keep thinking, like, the Mike Tyson we envision is the Mike Tyson from 1988, the guy that knocked out Michael Spinks. Understand that 20 years ago, Mike Tyson was 38 years old, losing old guy fights, like the old guy fights where you're a formerly great fighter, losing the guys that you should not be losing to just because you're old and you're slow and you're broken down. He was doing that 20 years ago. Fast forward 20 years later, and we still think at 58 years old with sciatica, bleeding ulcers, bad back, bad knees, that he's going to come out here and look like 1988 Mike Tyson. So the point is, no number of losses, no number of embarrassments, no amount of underperforming in the ring is going to erase from people's mind the memory of 1988 Mike Tyson, and that's his legacy. So it doesn't matter, because if losing to jobbers and to guys who aren't really world class ruined Mike Tyson's legacy, his legacy would have been ruined after the Kevin McBride loss in 2005, would have been ruined after he lost to Danny Williams. None of that happened. And so people are always, listen, if Mike Tyson comes back 6 months from now and says, I'm fighting Logan Paul, Jake Paul's brother, they talked about it after the fight, everyone is going to sit here and say, wow, Mike, I know the real Mike Tyson wasn't there the last fight before that, or the last fight before that, but the next fight, when he fights Jake or Logan Paul, he's going to be ready. We're going to see 1988 Mike Tyson. That is his superpower, is making us think we're still in the Reagan administration.
Well, that is actually a pretty incredible superpower, but also I have to leave it there, partly because of my bad knees and my bad back. But Morgan, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Anytime, folks.
Of course, Morgan Campbell is a senior contributor at CBC Sports. He's also the author of My Fighting Family, Borders and Bloodlines and the Battles That Made Us. You can watch, if you must, the Mike Tyson and Jake Paul fight on Netflix. I'm Al-Amin Abdul-Mahmoud, and this is Commotion. Okay, this next story involves a bit of a quick history lesson. It's about a violent conflict in Northern Ireland. You may be familiar with the Troubles, but the Troubles isn't something you can really sum up quickly, so just bear with me for a moment. It is a conflict that took place from the late 60s until 1998. Those years were marked by terrible acts of violence and the deaths of thousands of people. It started as Northern Irish Catholics began protesting against discrimination they felt from the majority Protestant population. Catholics weren't allowed to get certain jobs. They faced a lot of brutality from a mostly Protestant police force. They wanted to leave the UK and join the rest of Ireland. So the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, was formed. It became a powerful and violent force. The Troubles ended with the Belfast Good Friday peace agreement, but this history still weighs very heavily on Northern Ireland. Say Nothing is this new show on Disney Plus that focuses on this period during the early 70s. There are 3 women at the heart of the story based on real people. I've got a couple of Irish culture critics who are here to talk to me about it. Louise Bruton is here from Dublin, and Seamus O'Reilly is originally from Derry, now lives in London. Louise and Seamus, welcome to the show, friends.
Hi, how are you?
I'm happy that you're here. Listen, I'm going to start. Let me say this. The show is based on a book that is like lauded, award-winning. I think it won every nonfiction book award that there ever was. American journalist Patrick Radden Keefe. He's also the executive producer of the show. Seamus, when you interviewed Patrick for The Guardian, he told you he'd always thought of the Troubles as a, quote, male story, but then he discovers these 3 women who are at the heart of the show. Can you introduce us to the women? Who are they?
Well, I mean, first of all, you have probably the 2 protagonists you spend the most time with, which is sisters, Dolores and Marion Price. They're young girls when we first meet them, literally schoolgirls, involved in sort of passive, non-violent resistance, kind of, going on marches and protests and that kind of thing. And through the course of the show, you see quite quickly they renounce non-violence and they end up becoming among the first ever active IRA members who were women. And their life is kind of in parallel, kind of bookended with the experience of another woman and her family, and that would be Jean McConville. So Jean McConville was a mother of 10 who was quote unquote disappeared in the parlance of the time on the suspicion of the IRA that she was a British informant. So the show follows in most of its running time is following the sisters and particularly Dolores, but then you do cut to the experience of Jean, but more especially her family, who have to deal with this devastating loss. Yeah, all of the complex kind of loyalties and sort of frictions that arises. So
Dolores and Marion joined the IRA. They are, we sort of see them as like these pacifists who joined the IRA. Then they're planning to join a peaceful protest. Then their father strongly disapproves of this. Louise, I just want us to listen to a bit of their conversation at the dinner table.
In a civilized society, what does violence get you? Are you charge the police, they attack with batons, and everybody goes home with bruises and nothing changes?
And you think that non-violence will do better? Explain this to me, because I'm a wee bit confused. You think you can take a dander through 70 miles of sheep shite and the prods will just hand over the cushy jobs? Since when has going on a walk ever changed anything?
Since when has going on a walk ever changed anything? Louise, look, Dolar's in that clip advocating for peaceful protest. Then she becomes this active participant in the IRA. Talk to me about like her evolution in the show.
So I think that discussion at the family dinner table is a great representation of how different generations approach history, how they approach what's going on in their immediate neighborhood. So the Price father and their Auntie Bridie, they would have been both very involved in the IRA. Their Auntie Bridie had lost her hands and her eyesight in kind of through the violence. So they weren't a family that was removed from the activities of everything that was going on. So when the two teenage daughters were choosing this pacifist route, they were like, okay, what you're doing now isn't working. So we're going to, this is our rebellion. But as they were going on this just a walk, as their father describes it, they were ambushed, and they were ambushed by people who were opposing their Catholic aim of solving everything through peace and hymns in the instance of this walk that they went on. But as they were being bombarded and attacked and beaten up, the police force were just watching them. So that just shows what the scenario was, and there were only in the north where only some people were protected by the people whose job is to protect everyday people. So that was the big turning point for them to go, okay, this way isn't working, so what next? And it's almost, so Dolores is the main, she's portrayed as kind of the leader between the two sisters, and immediately she's got these strategies that the rest of the active members of the IRA seemingly didn't have either. So she takes her smarts that she would have always had, and she applies them in a new way, which sees her rising up the ranks quite quickly with her sister in tow. And I think they do place an awful lot of the power in Dolores's experience, but Marion is as influential, and as they both advance, they both become as ruthless as the men that the men who are the same age as them, and the men that had been in it for generations. But even more interestingly enough, I think in terms of just being a TV viewer, not being but finessing the history of it all, their evolution from young girls to like women, in terms of the style, in terms of how they move through the world. In the first episode, they're wearing tweed skirts and Aran jumpers. And then in the next episode, they're wearing full leather trench coats. And there's chic hairstyles, and they're smoking cigarettes, and they're drinking beer with the boys. It's this real leap forward in terms of them growing up very, very quickly based on the surroundings that they find themselves in.
Seamus, I think it's worth contextualizing for listeners that you don't get a lot of TV shows that are willing to deal with the troubles. They're just not very, it's not covered very often. When you sort of write about in your piece that any work that tries to deal with the troubles is bound to be a little bit controversial. What is it about this show? What is it about this topic that makes it a risk, you think?
That's a very, very good question. I think anybody who writes about this period and these time and these issues, I mean, I'm from Derry, so and when I write fiction, and then I write occasionally things for the screen, and anytime things gesture into that way, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say there's discomfort among major broadcasters. I think I've always taken it to be that the risk of offence is probably a big part of it. Clearly, a national broadcaster, shall we say, doesn't necessarily want to make something that's going to offend other people or be super divisive.
Sure.
Which, for example, I think this show could be. For all of its, I think it's probably a good thing that a piece of drama that talks about this issue should be. But it's also it's a very thorny issue in terms of getting across a picture that for particularly a British broadcaster, which will involve having to deal with some extremely tricky parts of British history specifically. I mean, an awful lot of people don't know very much about it. I mean, I spoke to Josh, who plays the young Jerry Adams in the show. He's a fantastic performance. He's a Scouser, but he sounds like perfect West Belfast accent. And I'm someone who would really, really catch someone on that. So I was very annoyed I didn't get to. But he was telling me that when he told all of his friends in Liverpool, oh yeah, I heard back about I heard back about Jerry Adams, and they were like, oh great, is he the director? They didn't even know who Jerry Adams was.
Well, it's actually like we should maybe point out who Jerry Adams is, because in the show, Jerry Adams is sort of pulling all the strings of the IRA. The real Jerry Adams denies all involvement. There's a disclaimer at the end of the episodes to actually just say that also. Louise, where do you make of the inclusion of that particular disclaimer? I see you both laughing as you're trying to answer this question.
Well, Seamus and I were both texting over the weekend, been like, how are they getting away with this? So the disclaimer, this powerful disclaimer that is alluding to the fact that what they're representing Jerry Adams as is technically an act of fiction, because the storyline that we're following is from these tape recordings from the Belfast Project, which is where former IRA members told their version of events, and a lot of those tape recordings name Jerry Adams as the man who was the top of the command chain, who was ordering these killings and these abductions and everything else. So he denies this. He denies this when he had been arrested for questioning around the murder of Jean McConville. He denies this, I would say, every time he's probably put in front of a TV camera.
And he's a public figure now, right? So he's not like he stopped being a public figure. He's a politician. He's
a very active, prominent name and face of Irish politics, and has been, as far as in my living memory, Jerry Adams is there. And it's fascinating because we get such insights into everybody else's lives in the TV show. They're portrayed as these incredible characters with very complex inner and outer lives. Throughout the series, we see the Price sisters kind of at battle with themselves in the acts that they've been part of and how they can proceed just living in the world. It's a very complicated thing. But because Jerry Adams is a public figure who is actively denied any involvement with the IRA, he is sort of reduced to being a cardboard cutout of himself in this TV series. And that's not to say, that I think he's one way or that he's another, but he is, when he's interviewed, he is a personable character. He's very intelligent. He is charming. That is why he's still a very well-known person today, no matter what you think of his politics. So he's reduced to something as a villain in this series, even though he's not the one who's at any murder scene, and the Price sisters are. And it's just interesting the way that some people can be portrayed quite straight off the bat as freedom fighters, but he who's allegedly doing the same thing but from behind a desk is seen as this menacing villain. And then comparatively to, say, the British Army, British police, British everybody, because they have the titles, because they have the uniforms, their acts of violence, their acts of murder, their acts of all the long list of crimes that have been committed, they're fine because they've got the title, they got the uniform. And then Jerry Adams, whatever it has that he has done or hasn't done, which is that's where you have to approach this subject with his I don't know. There's always a big kind of a skeptical well after you question Jerry Adams' involvement in this. It's very hard to know how much of a leash he can be kind of given in this situation, because we don't know. We won't know until he's dead, probably, because if he has some journals locked away in a kind of a lead-sealed vault somewhere.
Yeah, that's not information that is currently available to the public, which is why a show like Say Nothing has to handle this and getting around it by saying, this is the real Jerry Adams denies all sort of involvement. This is a purely fictionalized representation. There is clearly more to say about the show, so we are going to keep talking. In the meantime, I'm going to say goodbye to our radio audience. So it's like, for folks who are listening on the radio, we are a podcast. You can find the longer version of this conversation on our podcast. In the meantime, Seamus O'Reilly's here. He's a culture writer from Derry, now in London. Louise Bruton is a culture critic in Dublin. Do yourself a favor and subscribe to her Substack. It's called Legless in Dublin. It's incredible. My name is Al-Amin Abdul Mahmoud, and for the folks listening on the radio, there's, again, a lot more to say about the show, Say Nothing. I'm really fascinated. We're going to keep this conversation going. You can find the rest of it on our podcast. See you there.